Good afternoon. Welcome back to Wesleyan. For those of you who...
I'm probably doing
What I see our Wesleyan tech person is using a pencil. Just resourceful, as always. So I'm Sarah Williams, and I have the pleasure of moderating this panel today. I'm class of 88, so I'm here for my 25th reunion. Exciting. I don't think anybody has the slides.
Oh,
Okay.
You were informed someone did.
Oh, does anyone have slides? No, I think we're just
Just
having a
in case.
discussion. Okay. Yeah. We're going to be a very low-tech, high-content panel. I won't go into everybody's bio, but I have Dan Gregory from Northeastern, who runs a venture accelerator, and will tell us more about what that looks like. Marcus Chung, who is a social entrepreneur working as a consultant to large corporations on issues around supply chain and others, and Jordan Lexton, who has created a startup, nonprofit startup for young people who've been involved in the juvenile justice system and providing them with employment opportunities. So we'll talk a little bit more about the different vantage points that are represented here. And also there's a reception afterwards for the Center for Social Entrepreneurship just across the way at the Alberton Center from 4 to 5, so I hope we'll be able to continue our conversation there. So how fun to talk about making change happen and approaches to social innovation, a very broad topic, and one that a lot of people are thinking about these days. I know in MBA programs that I interface with, the Social Enterprise Club is the most popular club that everybody wants to be part of. And the White House has a social innovation fund to support nonprofit enterprise. And Echoing Green, that provides awards for social entrepreneurs, has seen their application process triple in the last couple of years. And businesses are feeling more and more that customers are looking for them to demonstrate social impact and consider environmental and social issues when they're operating their businesses. So it feels like it's all around us, which is not new to those of us from Wesleyan. I think we've been had that orientation for a long time. But it feels like it's more pervasive now, and I'm pleased that we have so many different perspectives represented on the panel. So I wanted to start just by seeing if what trends you all are seeing from your different vantage points around social innovation, and can you give an example of something that you think is kind of on the cutting edge of what's happening right now? Want to start? Anybody want to start?
Yeah, I can start because I feel like this past week and a half I really have been living that. So I've been working with a media group called the IS Collective, the Inspired Storytellers Collective, to really think about the way that we communicate what the mission of my organization is called Drive Change, and it's a food truck business that hires and trains and empowers formerly incarcerated youth. So one of the trends, I think, is really being mindful of the message being communicated in a more artful, design-heavy way to potentially break into different levels and different entry points beyond just the nonprofit sector and beyond just people in my particular realm who are interested in criminal justice. So we spent 2 weeks filming a short video that's going to be the beginning of our crowdfunding campaign. So tying those two things in, the use of the internet to develop and create funds for startup organizations, but also to the way that we're able to create these more conceived, art-inspired projects that relate to the social mission. So I think more money investing upfront, more money in what the picture and image of your organization looks like from a design aesthetic, and bringing the nonprofit sector into the 21st century in that way.
I'll just key off with that because I think for, my background is working with very large corporations and sort of making change within them and hoping that we can take sort of the scale and size of larger corporations and have a positive social or environmental impact through our operations or other types of programming. But the idea of communications is one that grows increasingly important, especially now that people are on social media, our customers have sort of demanded a level of transparency that wasn't true from corporations in the past. And there's a lot of discussion on how do you balance this type of storytelling in an authentic way, but also to be true to your brand, but also, and then not to overstate what it is that companies are doing, because you definitely want to walk that fine line of saying, here's some of the great work that we believe we're doing, but not be boastful. And so communications, I think, is definitely top of mind for a lot of large corporations with regards to social change.
So my seat is an interesting one at Northeastern. 3.5 years ago, we started something called IDEA, which is a student-run venture accelerator. Entirely student-run except for me. I get to be in the room, and it has grown very organically. And in that short period of time, the whole key to its attraction is there's a peer-to-peer interface between ventures or entrepreneurs that have ideas and their first interaction to build those ideas into something sustainable. And so we've had over almost 350 ventures walk through the door. We currently have 170 active ventures. So, and we're a major research university. We're not a liberal arts college, and so that's a different model. But I see the following characteristics. Obviously, the overall demand for entrepreneurial skills from a workforce development point of view is huge. And people want these skills, even if the venture they're working on is not going to be terribly successful or end up being terribly successful. The social component is in part of virtually all of the ventures. There can be high growth technology companies that still hold on to a social value in the proposition, all the way to potato farming in Kenya, which we're incubating, which has clear social value and just and mission. We're seeing a great variety of forms of organization, hybrid forms of for-profit, not-for-profit, multiple partnerships going forward to achieve a certain goal. There's a huge consciousness around sustainability and responsible use of resources, and that cuts across, again, the high growth life sciences so all of these things are very, very encouraging. No one is going to dismiss anyone who claims to be a social entrepreneur, but a lot of people will fight the fact that they maybe don't want to be referred to as a social entrepreneur when they have a lot of social value that they're bringing to the market. So these labels become very difficult. And the hottest single category, which I'm delighted in, is food and nutrition. Because we've been killing ourselves with the food that we eat, and the young people realize that, and there are all kinds of different permutations of food that we're seeing.
One of the things, well, actually, I wanted to take a minute, which I meant to do at the beginning, and ask people in the room how many of you would consider yourselves, and we've talked a little bit about trying not to spend a lot of time on the definitions because we could get really swimming through them, but how many people here consider themselves social entrepreneurs? Can I see a show of hands? And how many consider yourselves social intrapreneurs, if we're going to use that, being a change agent within a larger organization? Okay, well, we can come back to that in a little bit. But one of the things that I was thinking from what you said, Dan, was what I see, I manage several philanthropic funds and also an impact investing fund, and what I see is a trend towards being agnostic about sector. You know, it's partly what you're saying, that somebody has an idea and they just want to figure out the most effective way to do it. It doesn't matter. Can you raise more money as a for-profit or not-for-profit, depending on how the structure is? You may have found that a little bit too short. But I'm wondering kind of what does that mean for people who are just starting up new enterprises, how to determine what's the best way to structure yourself as you're going forward. Either one of you.
I just thought. So I think it all boiled away. It's how are you going to source capital to run the enterprise? Can you do it from the client side with a paying customer, and is that customer supported in some fashion to enable them to afford it? Or is that proposition not there and you need to look towards foundations and other funding sources? I think it used to be, certainly 20 years ago, that nonprofit meant my goal is social good. For-profit simplistically meant enriching stockholders and senior managers. And all I'm saying is I'm seeing a huge blending of those things with a lot of concern about resource utilization and sustainability, and with a genuine feeling that social good is going to be delivered. Now there are many ventures that we have that those things aren't important to. So I'm not saying it's all I'm saying is it's cutting across lines much more than in my experience it did.
I will say for me that the hybrid structure has been crucial. And when I initially was first thinking about starting this organization, I didn't even know what a social enterprise was. I just thought, of course it's going to be a nonprofit. It'll be a 501c3, of course. Like, what else could it be? But when I talk to investors, when I can say that we will be self-sufficient in 3 years, that's a remarkable thing for people to hear. And that has to do directly with the fact that our model is a hybrid, where we have a larger umbrella organization that's 501c3, but then smaller incorporated franchises, essentially, of different food trucks that will be able to generate their own revenue, and that will just recycle back into the programming that we do. So that has been a crucial part of the business side of it. When you talk to investors who aren't necessarily foundation people, that becomes a number and a time frame that people really want to hear, and that transforms Drive Change into a different realm than other nonprofits within the criminal justice sector. So I think that the hybrid structure for me has been a crucial one. And also I'm a person of balance, so it's been kind of great that we can have this hybrid for the organization, and that way we can do tax redemption and benefits, but then we can also have a very driven business model that will push our food trucks forward into a market that extends just the nonprofit sector.
I think from the corporate side, traditionally, if you were a large corporation and you wanted to do grant making, you would set up a private foundation. So there are many companies that have a foundation that's associated with them, but there are strict walls between the company and the foundation for good reason, and mostly for tax purposes. But in my experience, there's a growing sort of overlap between where funding should come from if a company wants to invest in a project. And so there are self-dealing laws that prevent foundations from investing in projects where the corporation will benefit. And so increasingly when you say, for example, so I worked at Gap, and when we launched Product Red about 10 years ago, there was a question of whether or not the funding should come from the foundation, because here you were supporting organizations that were delivering AIDS relief in Africa. But then, given the huge marketing campaign that supported that, and the revenue that was generated from the sales of the t-shirts and the other types of product, there was a real question of whether or not the foundation could legitimately fund the program because Gap was receiving a return and a benefit from it. So even in a large corporation setting, it's interesting because the conversations are becoming such that we want to invest in programs that have a positive social impact, but it doesn't make competitive sense for Gap, for example, to then invest in a program that's about food. So how are we leveraging the assets of the company in such a way that we can make a bigger impact, doing something that's core to our operations, leveraging our supply chain, knowing that we're in communities in Africa where we have manufacturing. And so it becomes blended, it's a blurry line, and it leads to really interesting conversations. And I think that we're at a point where traditional foundations, at least from the corporate sense, are feeling a little bit antiquated because of these restrictions.
Yeah. Yeah, I would add, I've worked for 10 years for Pfizer running their corporate philanthropy, and the amount of money that we gave away in grants was tiny compared to the amount of money that we gave away in medicine and other products. And there are lots of ways you could debate where the social benefit should lie within that, but I think there is a shift. Plus you have much more access to the CEO when you're
in the business
Yeah.
side. Just to go back to something you said earlier, Marcus, around kind of demand for greater transparency from customers for businesses. In the wake of what happened in Bangladesh, I know you're very busy in helping companies as they're kind of scrambling to think about what they're going to do with their supply chain. I'm wondering, kind of, one, what do you think the fallout will be kind of in the long term around that particular issue? And is there a role for consumers what is the role? Obviously, there is one in kind of pushing for social innovation in that realm as well.
Yeah, so absolutely to your second question, there is a role for consumers, and currently I advise the Children's Place exclusively, so I've been working with them full time. We were sourcing from a factory that was in the building that collapsed, and so as you can imagine, the last month of my life has been spent on this issue, and in fact had several calls just today and more this weekend where we're working through some of these issues. And one of the things that gets the attention of our CEO is that there were protesters in our stores for the past few weeks. And so, it's a way for consumers to sort of voice their concerns, to sort of say this is an important cause. But what's challenging is that, we offer a value product, and there's no evidence, at least from what we've seen, that consumers are willing to pay more for the goods. And these investments take real dollars, and I'm in the process right now of negotiating sort of what it is that we can do as an industry to shore up the situation in Bangladesh. And we're working across different companies, working with members of Congress, working with the trade associations. There's a lot going on between US and European companies, if any of you have been following this debate. But at the end of the day, we're going to be investing millions of dollars to hopefully prevent this from happening again, building a sustainable industry on the ground, which we can be proud of to source from. But, does that mean that your t-shirts can't be $5? Perhaps. And we don't hear right now from consumers that they're willing to spend that extra money for the assurance that their supply chain is, responsibly managed. But for sure, like the voice, the protesting, the messages we've gotten on Facebook, that gets our attention, and it's important for us to be able to have a response and to my earlier point, build programs that are authentic to us so we can respond with credibility.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if you have, from some of the new venture startups that you see, what are, in addition to food, kind of what are some other areas that people are tackling, and do you see kind of a mindset from the very beginning in terms of ethical sourcing, where there's, from the ground up, people are going to start thinking about some of these issues?
I think that most of our ventures are not facing, supply chain challenges. They're way too small. They're often services but again, there's a range. So I don't feel that I have much to comment on that.
Mm-hmm. Well, another question I had for you was how being involved in social innovation means that inevitably there are going to be risks taken and mistakes made. And someone told me that Thomas Edison said, well, I didn't fail 5,000 times. I successfully discovered 5,000 approaches. I don't need to try again. And so how can you each give an example of something that you have seen as a colossal failure or a small failure in trying to move the needle on social innovation, and what have you learned from that?
So I think I'm gonna answer that question slightly differently than perhaps you're looking for. But I think that the reason it's so important for Wesleyan University and for universities to have a role in nurturing ventures, social or otherwise, is precisely because you have to make mistakes, and if you're not making mistakes, you're really not pushing hard enough. And so young people, particularly at Wesleyan or Northeastern, they've gotten there because they've gotten 1,400, 1,500 board scores, they've gotten straight A's, maybe a B+ here or there. They've written great essays. They're even if they're furious with their parents, they're trying to appeal to their parents. So they've been brought up trying to do everything right and being measured in that fashion. And then they enter what is the hardest thing in the world to do, which is to start an enterprise of your own dream. You're driven by the passion of the dream, but there's so many roller coaster, so many dips in the road that it's very, very painful, and you make huge mistakes. And I think the university has an opportunity through experiential education and opportunities, to let young people, and I used to think that it's great to do it while you're an undergraduate. I think when you're in your 20s, you should be trying to start businesses, trying to start social ventures, social enterprises, because the education you get by making those mistakes and learning from those mistakes are so powerful. You can get some of that in the classroom, but you can't be a leader unless you're out there trying to do something, trying to accomplish something. I spoke to, or was at a presentation by MIT, a PhD in advanced mathematics from MIT, who bumped into a group of people who were starting a party site in the Cambridge area. And he stopped his studies and spent a year trying to start this silly venture. Certainly sounded silly to me. And he learned. He said that year was the most powerful learning that he possibly could get, because you don't have any support system. You do have support system, but you're going out there and you're saying, I want this idea to exist in some concrete fashion. It takes huge courage, and you invest so much of yourself in it. So you learn to accept the mistakes and learn from them, and so I don't think I think focusing on the big mistakes, it's hard to identify one or two of them, but if you're making them, you're probably making progress, is what I would say.
Yeah, just piggyback over that. I mean, I would totally agree that, so I left my full-time job a little over a year ago in February of 2012, and I have learned more in this past year and some time in this process of starting something than I possibly could have anywhere else. Everything from web design to film production to forming relationships with different stakeholders, to the legal side of how to actually incorporate something, to really the curriculum development that we're doing for the organization. And I'm now also in the food world, and I was certainly not before. So getting in the kitchen and literally cooking things to figure out what we're going to be serving on our first food truck. So all of these different ways that I've expanded my scope of knowledge throughout this one place is really remarkable, and of course mistakes come through that, right? I definitely think that one of the hardest things, and it struck me when you said this about something being so close to you, is that you do have that vision for it, and you can see it, and you can feel it, like you can really see it out there, and you want it so desperately to reflect those dreams that you've had and the time and energy that you've put into it. But the reality is that it's never going to. It's not going to exactly reflect what it is that you think it will be. And I think letting go of that a little bit and still recognizing that you're doing something really good is important, right? Like just knowing that everything you do, you envision what it will be. Like coming here this weekend, I like envisioned I envisioned what was gonna happen tomorrow night, you know?
Yeah, we already let it go with that.
The reality is everybody here. Yeah. But the reality is that it's probably not going to be exactly that. And I think that when you have good instinct and good gut and you're making mostly good decisions, that it becomes something wonderful. And like, that's really what it is. So there have been definitely like concrete mistakes throughout the way. I wanted to change the name of the organization at one point because I just like was saying drive change over and over and over again in my head, and it just felt awkward. But other people thought I was crazy. So, you know, consistency, making a decision and sticking to it, those things are really beneficial. But then I think just letting go a little bit if you can, because it is really hard, because it is so close to you when you're starting it yourself. And recognizing that as long as you trust yourself and you trust your instincts, that you're going to make something great, even if it's not what you originally envisioned.
The cool thing is, while we can strum, you know, while it's very emotional and there's lots of passion and all of those great things, you're learning really hard skills about starting something within a large corporation, starting something, you know, whole cloth, going into, you know, your favorite university and advising them on starting new stuff. It's a toolkit that's very
Absolutely.
real and tangible.
Absolutely.
And I think even within, you know, I feel really lucky to have been in positions where I had the opportunity to think big within my company and do things that the company has never done. And so it's that same sort of visioning process and iterating on your idea until it gets to a final product. But one of the things that I've learned is that you never pitch an idea just once. You have to tweak sort of your pitch from time to time. You learn along the way and learn sort of what didn't resonate with the person you were talking to, what might have resonated, how do you dial that up in your next conversation. And you have to be sort of tenacious in this environment and make sure that you stick to your values and don't lose the core of what it is that you're trying to accomplish. And also be opportunistic. And you know, I'll share with you one story that so I was head of corporate responsibility at Talbot's and really wanted to bring this program to the company where we were introducing factory-based learning for the women garment workers. And so I wanted to do some basic sort of life skills lessons in the factories because many of the women who are in garment factories have not finished education, have had very basic levels of literacy or numeracy. And so this to me was something that we...
Sorry, Mark.
This is something that I felt really passionate that we as a women's brand could do for the women in our supply chain. And I brought up the idea a few times to our CEO, to our head of sourcing, and it was met with sort of lukewarm acceptance. Like, it's a great idea. Why don't you just continue to think more about it? And I was like, of course I'll continue to think more about it. I just want some money. I'm going to have the program. But then you have to be ready to sort of launch on those opportunities or leap onto those opportunities. And what ended up sort of turning the tide for me was I was in the airport in Jordan at 4 a.m. with my boss, and we had been in Jordan visiting factories and working through a particularly difficult issue with one of the factories that we sourced from. And he was like, tell me more about that idea that you had. And I was like, let me get my computer and show you my PowerPoint presentation. And this was like in the airport lounge at 4 in the morning. We had a layover, I think, in Rome a few hours later. And he's like, I think I can go to our CEO and get you some funding for this because I think it has merit. So, you learn from the mistakes along the way, but as a compliment to that, take every opportunity you get because you never know when you're going to hit that moment where you'll gain traction.
Yeah, and that's also just a matter of relationships too,
Yeah.
which obviously is such a central core of all that we do in any field that we're in. I think that is something that has been so important to me in all of this is taking the time and energy to invest in relationships with people and with organizations and stakeholders that are potentially going to be bonds that you're going to be able to not access and use and abuse in any kind of way, but really have that personal connection with. That has been a remarkable resource and is directly related to that for sure.
There's a lot of discussion about innovation and impact, and then figuring out how do you measure. You can try all these great new things, but how do you measure the impact that you're actually having on the social issue that you're trying to address? And can you give some examples of ways that you are planning to measure impact, maybe in your case, Jordan, or Marcus, what are some of the metrics that you're helping companies develop, and what are some of the startups?
Sure. I'll start. So the way that this works for us is that Drive Change is a reentry program for young people who are coming out of jail and prison. I'm from New York City, and we're starting in New York City. And New York State is actually one of 2 states to automatically arrest 16-year-olds as adults. So I actually taught inside of Rikers Island for 3 years. That's where the moment of obligation and kind of my background and all of this came from. Because I saw so many young people leave jail only to come back, and thought about what were the structures and systems in place that were contributing to that, because the potential of so many of my students was so high. So a lot of it was the relationship between that legal structure where someone leaves adult jail and has a felony record with an open case as opposed to a juvenile adjudication. The likelihood that that person is going to be able to go on, get a job, get into school is just so dwindled. And then additionally, the lack of support systems for particularly adolescents, because they tend to be harder to retain in programs that were out there, that combination really made the recidivism rate, the likelihood that someone will get rearrested and then potentially reincarcerated for this population is 70%. And the population throughout the country, it's at about average is about 40%. So that's a lot higher for this specific population. So for us, one of our goals through our reentry program is that we're saying concretely that we'll lower recidivism rates for the youth in our program from 70% to 20%, based off of evidence-based models of other organizations that are similar that have been able to do that kind of work as well. Another measurable impact for us has to do with placement. So our program is intentionally transitional. You come through an 8-month program, and then at the end of it, it's our goal to place somebody, a young person we're working with, in, depending on their skill set and interest, either permanent job employment or potentially another educational path. We have transferable skills curriculum in social media marketing, money management, accounting, and culinary arts. So let's say you're sparked by something and you want to go back to school for it. It's our job at Drive Change to make sure that we can, and we're aiming for 100% successful placement in our program with an 80% retention after 1 year. And we're able to track that also through, because we're working with probation, so we'll be able to have those numbers accessible with recidivism and also with the placements. And then on the advocacy side, we're using digital tracking with our customers to see if our presence is actually going to broaden awareness of the public's awareness of this law in New York. So through Square and through these digital models that will allow us to have a digital POS system when someone pays at the truck, we can actually gauge if we're going back to the same neighborhood, if people are, if their awareness of this law, of the 16-year-old law is increased over, let's say, the course of 2 or 3 months, just by a simple 1-question survey. So those are 2 or 3 real concrete measurable impacts that we're thinking about. But those numbers are so important when communicating it to, because right now as a startup, right, being able to communicate those numbers is really important to us.
And I would say that metrics are, there's no doubt that metrics are important. And it's difficult to quantify social impact, and I think everybody struggles with that. Some of the things that we've measured in our programs are number of workers who've gone through the training, number of workers who have been promoted from the sewing line to a frontline manager, who've received these types of new skills and lessons. But what's I find universally more powerful, even to really numbers-driven CFOs, is when you can uncover the stories and share with them the story of the woman who was able to sort of take control of her reproductive health and not have that 5th child, and once she learned how to use contraceptives properly, or the story of the woman who found the strength to leave an abusive relationship and take the money that was rightfully hers that she earned and not relinquish it to an abusive husband. And so, we always strive to figure out how to measure our impact, but I think we don't want to lose sight of those powerful stories that make this all worthwhile.
So I obviously don't work with one social enterprise. I have a portfolio of ventures that the student team manages, but there is a social venture that I'm particularly happy about because he's done so well. And this is the scenario. He goes to Kenya, to a village in Kenya, where a group of women create clothing, make clothing, which he ships to the United States, which is passed through a distribution channel that is university-based and is women and men's clothing. The proceeds from that go it's a for-profit company here. The proceeds go largely back to the women, who reinvest that money in buying land, who then farm that land, and now have about 12 or 13 times the rate of income for themselves relative to the population, which, because they are so touched by this whole process that had brought them wealth, they spread that throughout the community, and the whole thing just filters out. And from a storytelling perspective, this guy is one of the worst presenters on God's earth. He's a handsome guy, so he gets some attention perhaps that way. But he tells the story, and people just fall over. It's storytelling with very precise metrics. And you just can imagine, well, if he keeps doing this for 2 or 3, he's changing an entire economy. And he hasn't graduated from college yet. And it's amazing. And so that's kind of the heroes. The heroes, for me, are these young entrepreneurs who are putting it together and building really interesting things.
Yeah, I think that question of the storytelling in addition to the actual hard numbers. I mean, I find with a lot of the organizations I fund, for the CEO, that's one of the most important skills, is if you can't tell it yourself, then figure out a way that you can get somebody else to tell it and have it on your website, because otherwise it's really hard for people to connect if they don't have that immediate piece of it. I want to leave time for questions. I guess I'm wondering if there are other, Jordan mentioned kind of her moment of obligation and how she got into this work, and I thought it would be interesting to hear from you, Dan, and you, Marcus, just a little bit about that piece of it, and then I want to talk about what it means at Wesleyan.
So my moments that I decided this was the way, well, so I grew up in a household where my father was one of the pioneers in the venture capital business, and it was before venture capital became what it is today. And he would come home and he'd talk about entrepreneurs, and he'd talk about them almost in heroic terms, in terms of, they were often scientists in labs or whatever, and they were going to do something of value to say. So that made a huge impression on me. I never wanted to be an investor. I always wanted to be a builder. And so my career I spent, I first started as an entrepreneur in large publishing companies, starting magazines. And then the world of media changed, and it went into the web and electronic technology. And so I got into digital media and started, or was involved with the startup of a variety of digital media companies. In between those ventures, I would do consulting, and one of my clients was Northeastern University, and the head of the music department had developed an online conservatory for the Boston Symphony Orchestra and wanted to know if it was a business. And so I spent a couple of months with him, and we determined what we determined. And then just totally coincidentally, the university was starting a program, which I'm still involved with, but it's not the IDEA program. And it was about creating ventures. And Northeastern is a wonderful place because it gives students space to go out and work. It has co-op cycles, so every undergraduate spends 3 6-month cycles out working, doing, in a hospital, law firm, whatever. And now they can spend that 6 months working on, ventures for themselves. And I got close to this, and I just saw the eagerness to learn. So I got mileage on the odometer. They've got no mileage on the odometer. They're blessed with not knowing what they don't know. And I'm blessed with being painfully aware of what I don't know, which is a lot. And so this dynamic really worked for me. And so I feel like if I can, from a workforce development point of view, if I can help one or two students, get the fever to build something, then I'm doing a work that I'm proud of, and that maybe my father would look down and say, he's doing good. So I decided to pursue it, and what has happened is the students have made it this huge program that is has a high level of awareness around Northeastern and has gotten some national coverage and stuff. And it's not me, it's this energy that the university was smart enough to let students run things and take a shot. So it's been great.
So my moment actually goes back to Wesleyan. It was my senior year, and I was working in the Office of Alumni Relations, and so I worked at a lot of events, did a lot of passing of drinks and hors d'oeuvres and things like that. And there was one event, I don't remember all of the particulars, but there was a group of alumni that were being honored. And one of them, and I wish I knew who it was, but I can't, but one of the women who was being honored was a chief diversity officer at her company. And as she described what she did day to day, it never occurred to me before that you could work within the construct of a large evil corporation and try to do good. And it was so powerful to hear her say that given a company's resources, if you can make change from within, the impact that you can have, the scale of the company's impact can be so great, and you can have a really positive impact on many people's lives. And so it was that moment that sort of turned on the light for me and made me realize that this was possible. And then my first job out of Wesleyan, I worked for a consulting company, and when I looked around the room, there were a lot of young 20-somethings who had come from Wesleyan and Williams and some Ivy League schools. There wasn't a whole lot of diversity either when it comes to ethnicity or socioeconomic background, and I felt that as a professional services firm, we were doing ourselves a disservice and not bringing different perspectives and sort of generating ideas from different perspectives. And so, along with a group of other first-year research associates, we put together a presentation, and in our sort of youthful excitement went to the CEO and said, we have an idea, and we really think that this company should embrace diversity in a more formal way. And got the company to add, we had pillars of values, and add an additional pillar called strength from diversity. And so it changed the way that the company recruited, it changed the schools that we went to and how we interviewed for potential candidates. But it was a really sort of powerful first example for me of what you can do within the construct of a large company. And it came from sort of that inspiration here at Wesleyan, hearing from another alum. And I wish I could remember her name.
Michaela.
Yeah, you should find her for me.
I would just point out Michaela Kingsley, who's in the front row, who's the new director of the Center for Social Entrepreneurship at Wesleyan, which is a new center that's just gotten off the ground in the last year and has really a robust offering of programs for students and alumni around social innovation. So if any of you have ideas from this conversation or others this weekend, Michaela is the person who can help plug you in, and there's a lot of connections going on with existing students or recent graduates and alumni around that. But I'd be interested in hearing from you if you have questions of the panel. I have a few more, but does anyone have anything they'd like to pose to one of our panelists?
This is for Marcus, I guess. I've been looking a lot into CSR and foundations that Can you just kind of clarify what the difference is between CSR on the for-profit side of a company versus them starting a foundation, and the reasons why they would want to do that, besides tax purposes and conflict?
Did everybody hear the question?
No. So I think the question is, why a company would invest in corporate social responsibility, CSR, or start a foundation which has more of a mission-driven, sort of pure motive in terms of the social impact side. And Taxes is definitely one reason that you would start a foundation, is to be able to funnel money into a nonprofit that is going to be tax exempt, and that's just the reality of it. But I think that it goes back to this idea of foundations not being able to invest in programs where the company benefits, and there's more and more sort of momentum around this idea that these types of investments should not only be good for society and good for communities, but also bring back some sort of benefit to companies. So where you're seeing a separation is that foundations are investing in purely philanthropic programs that aren't tied back to the company's core mission, whereas CSR efforts are really trying to leverage what the company does on a day-to-day basis and figure out how do you manage the externalities of those impacts so that you can do good instead of bad. That's my interpretation of it, if that makes sense.
I was just I was with a former colleague from Pfizer yesterday who runs the corporate social responsibility function for a large oil company, and she described her job as managing all the non-technical risk for the company. Her feeling was that she's not, looking at oil wells and yield and that piece, but that anything around the broader environmental questions or community issues, that's part of her purview. And so she has the foundation as one piece of it, but she sees that as the much bigger piece and a much more value-added piece within the company. Lisa, you had a question?
Yeah, this is for Jordan Lee. So I was wondering if there's
Speak up
synergy.
just a little.
Oh, sure, yeah, of course. I was wondering if there are synergies among other nonprofits, maybe probably related in New York or around the country, and whether you were kind of mentored or are mentoring other startups. I'm sorry, I missed the beginning.
Absolutely. That's been a huge part of this process for me. So New York City happens to have a number of well-versed and also some longer-term reentry organizations that predominantly work with adults who are coming out of longer-term prison sentences. However, there is now another Wesleyan 08er. Her name is Aviva Teva. She's not here this weekend, but Teva, I think I pronounced it. I always say that because it rhymes. Anyway, so she actually works for the Department of Corrections, and she's been building something called the Reentry Education Network, and it's actually a group of organizations and agencies that are invested in programs that develop education for people who are currently incarcerated and then post-release incarceration, because of the way that education really does lower recidivism for people after jail. So yeah, it's huge. The network is huge. I, as a teacher on Rikers, was exposed a little bit. I was exposed to the Fortune Society a little bit. I was exposed to another organization called Getting Out, Staying Out. So I had heard a little bit even before I'd started this of some organizations that were doing this work, but it was really my initiative. It started actually, it all started with me having my students who were currently young teenagers incarcerated writing letters to local legislators about what it was like to be young people who were considered adults, because the fact of the matter is that the voice of the people who are directly impacted by the law is rarely present inside of these board meetings. So I then took those voices literally to organizations and started to have the conversation about what's going on. So I went to the Correctional Association of New York first. I started interning there, and then through a woman there was connected to the Center for Employment Opportunities, which is a larger organization. There is now Drive Change host organization. So they've been a wonderful mentor. Mindy Tarla, who's the executive director of that, has been a personal mentor to me, and so has now as of 3 days ago, Elizabeth Glazer, who was the Deputy Secretary for Public Safety of New York. So getting connected to those people within that realm has been hugely beneficial. But yes, that network in New York City is relatively large. Trying to, with Drive Change, bring in the social enterprise piece so that we can break out a little bit of what it means to be a criminal justice-minded nonprofit, and get people thinking about different ways to support the same issues and missions, but in a slightly more innovative way. But yeah, the network has been really, really, really helpful.
Did you pay it forward?
Yeah, I absolutely. So we're actually working, the Center for Prison Education here at Wesleyan is a wonderful program as well. So tomorrow, 10:30 a.m., Sarah Green and I and another classmate are going to be speaking about prison education, but certainly connected back to Wesleyan and other young people who are interested in criminal justice. We're really in the implementation phase right now, so hopefully a couple years down the road, would love to 100%, be a part of that.
This is for Jordan. I just wanted to say, I was wondering how we can advocate or donate to drive change at this point.
That's a
Because-
great question, random person who I've never seen before. So Drive changed in the process of becoming a 501c3. We're in our incorporation process. In a few days, we'll have our own EIN bank account set up. We're starting our crowdfunding campaign, which will be on Indiegogo. I don't know if you guys know what that is, but you should look it up. It's not Kickstarter, but it's like the cause version. It is, so that's a great place that you can go as of June 6th. Our campaign will be on Indiegogo. And then before that, we when you're incorporating as a 501c3 and you can't necessarily give people the tax benefits initially, but you need the startup seed money to get something off the ground, you can send like a letter in addition to someone who may be interested in donating money that they can then file for the following year with their taxes and get benefits back, not for the year, but then following, and they'll get all the benefits that they would have otherwise. So once we have our EIN, you can go to drivechangenyc.org and you can donate directly through the website. And yeah, I would say the crowdfunding campaign is the best place to do that. And then if you want to talk to me afterwards, because you really just need to write a check right now, then
I was going to lend you my.
I'll be around all week.
So this is a funding question. So many people, and I feel like this is an issue with crowdsourcing too, but especially in social innovation, are really about giving seed money or startup money. I was wondering if any of you could speak on, I guess, staying relevant and having that sustainability when so much of it is focused on the innovation and really, like, I guess, staying true to your original mission and not overextending yourself and trying to be, so innovative all the time just to keep, the funding coming.
I need a restatement of the question.
Basically just staying relevant when so many people are looking to fund like the newest innovative thing. If your program's like 3, 4, or 5 years old, when it's no longer, I guess, considered new or maybe even as innovative.
I think, I'd like to add to that question because I've been thinking about what is the role of different funding sources, because there's the startup money for a new program or a new venture, but a lot of these programs we're talking about are operating outside of normal capitalist, it makes money and sustains the organization. So we're talking about operating funding after the initial startup funding or program funding, drives it from the original source.
I don't have any experience with that.
You're the.
Well, I think it is sometimes challenging. I advise individual donors and foundations, and a lot of times they want to be in the first group of funders and the person with the new idea, and they want to be in on the ground floor, especially because they're not giving initial grants of $500,000 or $1 million. They're giving more in the $25,000 to $50,000 range. So for them to give at that level to an organization that has a budget of over $1 million, they're less significant relative to the organization. So I think that's part of it, is thinking about the size of the funder and the size of the grant. And I think there is some interesting stuff happening around scaling up of nonprofits. I mean, that is part of what the Social Innovation Fund and the White House is supposed to be doing, and New Profit in Boston. There are other places where you, if you kind of demonstrated the first piece of your impact, then they're really trying to help you get to the Teach for America level and really, year up. And there are others that are, oh, great, yes, that are, really kind of going exponentially. But I think it is challenging because operating funding is less appealing. I always advise people to give operating money because I think it's hard to raise, and the person on the ground, the social entrepreneur, the nonprofit entrepreneur who's running the organization really does know best how to spend it. And so for anybody who's a funder, I do think that's a really important piece to give. I would say that even if you've been around 3 or 4 years, you can still be innovative. Just that little piece of your question, I would say that's, and the nonprofits that I recommend for funding are just continuously improving. They're constantly refining. They're in a constant process of increasing efficiencies. And it's an obvious thing to state, but I think those that can demonstrate that over time and freely admit the things that haven't gone well and how they've had to recalibrate their direction, I think those are the ones that have the staying power in terms of.
So I think I'm gonna answer that question with probably the same response, but I'll say it slightly differently. And that is that I think your question suggests that you're feeling like you need to kind of have something new and flashy to attract money this year, and you're devoting more and more of your time to fundraising, and it's harder and harder. And so what we would do if you came to IDEA is we would work on your plan, and we would try to understand what the core of the idea is, and to build as many sustainable, self-funding elements. I know nothing about what you're doing, and it may not be possible. But the degree to which you can sustain it on a return in some fashion on your operations, the better off you are, because it's such a drain. I've always served on small nonprofits, and it's just so exhausting the amount of time that goes into raising this money for this year's budget is very difficult.
I would be remiss if I didn't say something just obviously about metrics, and that if you're 3 or 4 years in, then hopefully you have some really nice stories to tell about the impact that you've had.
Absolutely.
And so that's the nice part about not being at the place
Yeah.
where Jordan is, where it's all going to happen.
I was going to say,
Definitely is going to happen.
I was going to say
but
that I
it
was
hasn't happened yet.
surprised that you were saying that you think that people want to fund startup-y
Right.
things,
It
because
doesn't feel that way.
it doesn't. Really, I like, because impact is such, impact and scale are really such needed for somebody to feel like their money is really going to go to something that is creating and making a difference. I found that many of the foundations and many of the grants are so focused on, we'll build the relationships with those foundations and grants now. So if you can hire someone who is a good researcher, who can really make those connections and call and really analyze and figure out what that grant or what that foundation is looking for, so that you're not wasting the time and the effort on many, many different grants that are just not going to ultimately fund you, that's really important. But definitely impact. We've been told, this sounds like a great idea, come back to us in 2 years, 3 years, when you actually have some numbers to show for it. So I'm surprised and happy to hear that. But yeah, I think impact is huge.
Do you have a question?
I was just going to respond. I had a couple jobs that gave me good experience. One was working for Nonprofit Finance Fund, which is a lender to other nonprofits. And went from just lending, which everyone thought couldn't be done, to also providing advisory services. And the first thing we do is help nonprofits figure out their business model. And so it doesn't end up looking like a corporate business model, but there is something that will make you sustainable for the type of nonprofit that you are. So for example, if you're an arts nonprofit, your business model is ticket sales. That's it. I mean, that's the majority of where your income comes. And it has an effect on your cash flow. And it also has an effect on when you need money or don't need money. If you get government funding, which is, let's say, close to guaranteed, but tends to come 3 months late, you need to understand your cash flow and how that's going to impact it. So business model, which I think is what you touched upon as the first thing. The other one was metrics. Don't shy away from it. You have to have it, and it's worth investing on really figuring out what is impact that you're creating. And I think that's where the innovation is. You're worth investing in that type of innovation to realize we're not quite getting the impact we thought, and innovate around getting it. And the final piece is, depending on how big or how long your nonprofit has been around, don't feel that it is a bad investment to pay for a really good person who focuses on fundraising and maintaining those relationships with foundations, because it's not just getting money from them, it really is them learning about how to work with you. And what we found is over time, they create rules just for you, but it's because they have confidence in how they're working with you. So maintaining those relationships, it's well worth the annual salary of that person as just that as a job. So those are the few things that.
That's excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, the Nonprofit Finance Fund is a great organization. And anybody who's thinking about a job development, I mean, I get a request probably twice a week. Do you know anybody who's a good development director?
Yeah.
That is absolutely, and there are some fabulous ones and some not so fabulous ones. So I think that is a great growth field for people, new graduates and others who are thinking about getting into it. Gabby?
Just on that note, I'm looking for a development intern to start in October. So if there are any Wesleyan grads here that are not sure what to do next year and are interested in development work and living in Kenya, talk to me. All right.
Great. Any other final questions? And then hopefully we can continue this conversation across the way. Great, thank you to our panel.